Wow. You actually touched on the next question. I wanted to ask you about the class component to this, right? Did you,
Yeah.
in your research, and not just for this book, but your research since writing this book, have you found any type of disparity or different treatment of black girls based on economic strata? What have you found along those lines?
Well, what's interesting is that, I mean, much of the implementation of instruments of surveillance, the, metal detectors,
Hmm.
security cameras, law enforcement, et cetera, in schools, those happen disproportionately in communities that are high poverty schools,
Hmm.
low performing high poverty schools. It's interesting to think about it also in terms of how it's played out in our public domain versus how it's played out in our private schools, right? And other independent schools that don't tend to have the same degree of punishment or punitive surveillance. The low income communities are often dealing with other structures, again, and with schools within these systems. They're often reinforcing the negative status quo conditions that impact life outside of the schools. So the same surveillance that's happening in schools is the surveillance that happens on their way to school, on
Hmm.
their way back from school. I remember being in a school in New York with a colleague, and we asked the girls how many of them are concerned about their safety getting to school, and almost all the hands went up, right?
Right.
And so, there's a real sense of urgency around safety that has yet to be engaged in these low performing, high poverty schools. Since researching push out and really looking at sort of what's happening among other groups, though, I think the issue about how Black feminine identity is misconstrued and responded to differently in schools is also one, though, that is not only present in the public, low performing, high poverty schools, that we also see high performing girls who come from middle class communities
Mm.
or above who are also experiencing differential treatment. And that is why I think it's important for us to center these discussions about implicit bias and the way in which we're making decisions that may we're all living in this racially stratified society. We recognize race, we talk about race a lot, but we don't talk about it well publicly,
Hmm.
and arguably privately either. But to the extent that it intersects with other identities to impact how people are receiving and interacting with structures and institutions and agencies, there's a particular void. And so when we're talking about girls and their experiences in schools, regardless of their socioeconomic status, teachers are seeing girls as black girls as black girls, and they're
Mm.
engaging with them as black girls. And so anecdotally, I've received calls, complaints. I've, certainly interacted with individuals who described for me the ways in which their black girl in private schools in very affluent communities are treated differently because they're perceived as loud, they're perceived as
Yeah.
disruptive, they're perceived as aggressive. And so, these again are code words that I think are worthy of our deep interrogation and deconstruction
Yeah.
as we start to really look at what our girls need to be thriving in this society and to work very diligently toward the goal of creating that reality with them.